The morning sun sparkled across Lake Windermere as I sipped my coffee on the back porch of my newly purchased lakeside home. I had moved here 6 months ago after 20 years of working in downtown Seattle, trading in sirens and skyscrapers for bird song and gentle waves. The decision to relocate was not an easy one, but after my divorce and subsequent burnout at the law firm, I needed space to breathe. This quiet lakeside community seemed perfect. Small homes with character, respectful neighbors, and the tranquility of nature just outside my door. I stretched and watched a blue heron stalk the shallows near my private dock. That dock had been a major selling point when I purchased the property. It extended 30 feet into the water, sturdy and well-built, with a small covered area at the end where I could fish even during our frequent Pacific Northwest rainfall. What most of my neighbors did not know was that I had arranged a part-time lease with the local Coast Guard Auxiliary. They used it occasionally for training exercises and as an emergency response point for this section of the lake. The arrangement was perfectly legal and properly documented. The community itself was governed by a homeowners association, something I had initially been wary of, but had accepted as part of lakeside living. Most residents seemed reasonable, focused primarily on maintaining property values and community standards without overstepping boundaries. I paid my dues on time and attended the quarterly meetings, but otherwise kept to myself, spending my days consulting remotely for my old firm and enjoying my hard-earned semi-retirement. The first sign of trouble came during the spring community meeting. I noticed a woman in her early 50s with highlighted blonde hair styled in the distinctive, "May I speak to your manager" cut, watching me from across the room. Her gaze was calculating, her smile tight and insincere as she presided over the meeting with military precision. Corinne Westfield, HOA president for 3 consecutive terms, seemed to take particular interest in my presence. I listened quietly as she ran through agenda items about grass height regulations and approved mailbox designs. Her voice carried a particular tone, sweet on the surface, but laced with authority that brooked no disagreement. The other board members nodded along to her every suggestion, a well-trained chorus supporting their conductor. After the meeting concluded, I gathered my things and prepared to leave when I felt a tap on my shoulder. Corinne stood behind me, hand extended, smile fixed firmly in place. "James, is it not? I do not believe we have been properly introduced. I am Corinne Westfield, president of Windermere Shores HOA. Her handshake was firm, her eyes never leaving mine as if searching for weakness. "Nice to meet you officially," I replied, maintaining politeness despite the immediate discomfort I felt in her presence. "I have been meaning to chat with you about your dock," she continued, gesturing toward the lake visible through the community center windows. "Several residents have mentioned they would love access for kayaking and swimming. We are thinking of implementing a community dock sharing program this summer." I kept my expression neutral. I appreciate the community spirit, but my dock is not available for public use. It is leased to the Coast Guard Auxiliary for training and emergency response. Something flickered behind her eyes, displeasure perhaps or disbelief. Her smile remained frozen in place. "Oh, but surely that is only occasional. The rest of the time it just sits there empty. It seems rather selfish when families could enjoy it, does it not? The HOA encourages resource sharing." "The arrangement is federal and exclusive," I explained calmly. "There are liability issues involved. The other community docks should serve recreational needs perfectly well." Corinne's smile tightened further. "Well, we will have to revisit this topic. At Windermere Shores, we believe in community first. I am sure we can find a compromise that works for everyone." She patted my arm condescendingly before moving away to speak with another resident. I watched her go, a slight uneasiness settling in my stomach. Something told me this conversation was far from over. As I walked home along the lakefront path, I noticed how she had already gathered a small group of residents, gesturing toward my property while speaking animatedly. The calm waters of Lake Windermere suddenly seemed less peaceful than before. 3 days after the community meeting, an official-looking envelope appeared in my mailbox. The Windermere Shores HOA letterhead gleamed at the top of the page as I unfolded the document inside. The letter was addressed to me personally, though the tone was anything but personal. Dear resident, it has come to the attention of the Homeowners Association Board that private Dock 17, attached to your property, is being underutilized as a community resource. As per Bylaw 7.3 regarding shared waterfront access, the board hereby requests that you make your dock available for resident recreational use on weekends between the hours of 10:00 a.m. and 6:00 p.m. effective immediately. Your cooperation in this matter will demonstrate your commitment to community values and neighborhood harmony. The letter was signed with Corinne's elaborate signature, complete with a small smiley face drawn inside the final loop. I read it twice, noting the creative interpretation of bylaws and the thinly veiled attempt to pressure me through appeals to community values. As a former attorney, I recognized manipulative language when I saw it. I drafted a response that same afternoon, careful to maintain professionalism while being absolutely clear. Dear Mrs. Westfield and HOA board members, thank you for your recent communication regarding Dock 17. I must respectfully decline the request for public access. The dock in question is subject to an exclusive federal leasing agreement with the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary for training and emergency response purposes. Contract USCG NW1045, copy attached. This arrangement predates my purchase of the property and includes specific liability provisions that prohibit general public access. Bylaw 7.3 pertains specifically to community-owned docks, not privately owned structures on deeded land. I trust this clarifies the situation. Respectfully, James Harmon. I attached copies of the relevant documentation and sent the response via certified mail. That should have been the end of it. It was not. The following weekend, I opened the community app on my phone to check for updates about the upcoming summer festival. What I found instead was a post from Corinne that made my blood run cold. Attention neighbors. It has been brought to my attention that certain new residents are refusing to participate in our community dock sharing program. Some people move to Windermere Shores but do not embrace the giving spirit that makes our neighborhood special. Instead, they claim government business to keep children and families from enjoying our beautiful lake. If you believe in community access, please make your voices heard. The post had dozens of supportive comments, many from residents I had never even met. Some explicitly named me as the selfish newcomer. Others suggested organizing a protest on my lawn. The digital pylon was swift and merciless. The effects were immediate and tangible. The friendly waves from neighbors ceased. The invitation to join the community book club was rescinded. When I visited the local market, conversations stopped as I entered, replaced by pointed whispers and sidelong glances. I had become the community villain without ever having the opportunity to defend myself. I tried to maintain my routine, focusing on work and enjoying my property, but the tension was palpable. Then, on a Tuesday morning while walking to my dock with fishing gear, I spotted something that made me stop short. Bright yellow signs had been posted at the entrance to my dock and along the railings. HOA property community access point coming soon. The signs were professionally printed and mounted with heavy-duty hardware. This was not a casual act but a calculated escalation. I placed my fishing rod down and carefully removed each sign, noting the damage to my property where they had been screwed directly into the wooden posts. That afternoon, I drafted a formal cease and desist notice. This communication serves as legal notice to cease and desist all unauthorized access to, modification of, or signage placement on the private property at 1782 Lakeside Drive, including the attached dock structure. Any further trespassing or property modification will be reported to local authorities and may result in legal action for damages and harassment. I hand-delivered the notice to the HOA office, leaving it with the part-time administrator who looked at me as if I had handed her a live snake. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of Corinne watching from her office, phone held to her ear, eyes narrowed in calculation. The battle lines had been drawn, and neither of us appeared willing to retreat. 2 weeks passed in uneasy silence. I documented everything: the social media posts, the damaged dock posts, the sudden rejection from the community. Each incident went into a growing file, organized by date and impact. My legal background had taught me the value of meticulous records, and something told me I would need them. The Coast Guard continued their scheduled training sessions twice monthly, with occasional unscheduled stops when lake patrols were necessary. I made sure to be present during these visits, partly to maintain the professional relationship and partly to demonstrate the legitimacy of our arrangement to any watching neighbors. On a cloudy Tuesday morning, a knock at my door broke my concentration while working. I opened it to find a young woman with a press badge and notebook in hand. "Mr. Harmon, Alicia Chen from the Lake County Chronicle. I am working on a story about private waterfront being illegally leased for profit in residential areas. Would you care to comment on your arrangement with federal officers using your dock?" Her question caught me off guard, but years in litigation had taught me to control my reactions. "There must be some misunderstanding," I replied calmly. "The arrangement is completely legal and not for profit. Who suggested otherwise?" The reporter consulted her notes. "We received a tip from a concerned resident who chairs the local homeowners association. She provided documents suggesting unauthorized commercial activity from this residential property." "Those documents would be falsified," I stated plainly. "I would be happy to provide you with the actual lease agreement, which was disclosed to the HOA when I purchased this property. This is not a commercial arrangement but a civic service agreement." The reporter seemed surprised by my openness and willingness to provide documentation. She had clearly expected defensiveness or evasion. After reviewing the legitimate paperwork, her story angle visibly shifted from neighborhood scofflaw to HOA overreach. She left with copies of all relevant documents and a new perspective on who the real story might be about. The following day, Lieutenant Commander Davis from the Coast Guard arrived for a scheduled equipment check. I met him at the dock as usual. "James, there is something you should see," he said, his expression serious as he gestured toward the bushes alongside the dock path. Partially concealed among the foliage was a small trail camera, its lens pointed directly at the dock entrance. One of my officers spotted it during approach. This is concerning from a security standpoint, given the nature of some of our operations. I stared at the unauthorized surveillance device, anger building inside me. This was not just HOA harassment anymore. This was potentially interfering with federal operations. "I did not install that," I said firmly, "and I did not authorize anyone to place surveillance equipment on my property." The commander nodded. I figured as much. This constitutes a security breach we need to document. Mind if I remove it as evidence? Please do, I agreed, watching as he carefully extracted the camera from its hiding spot, placing it in an evidence bag. We will run the serial number, he explained. If this is interfering with Coast Guard operations, it becomes a federal issue, not just a neighborhood dispute. That evening, an emergency HOA meeting notice appeared in all community mailboxes. Urgent. Vote on enforcement actions against bylaw violations at 1782 Lakeside Drive. The meeting was scheduled for 7:00 p.m. the following evening. I arrived early, sitting quietly at the back of the community center as it filled with residents. Karen stood at the front, a PowerPoint presentation queued up displaying an unflattering satellite view of my property with the dock circled in angry red. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, voice dripping with rehearsed concern. "As you know, our community thrives on shared values and mutual respect for rules. Unfortunately, we have a resident who believes these rules do not apply to him." For the next 20 minutes, she presented a carefully crafted narrative. I was an outsider exploiting community resources, denying access to families while profiting from government contracts, violating zoning ordinances, and refusing to integrate into neighborhood life. When she finally opened the floor for discussion, specifically calling for a vote on implementing daily fines until I complied with community standards, I stood and walked calmly to the front. "May I address the assembly before the vote?" I asked quietly. Karen's smile was tight. "2 minutes, Mr. Harmon, then we vote." I nodded and turned to face my neighbors. "I have listened carefully to these allegations, and I think you deserve to know the facts." I proceeded to distribute packets containing copies of the legitimate lease agreement, property deeds showing private ownership of the dock, county records confirming appropriate zoning, and most damaging to Karen, federal documentation showing that the HOA had been informed of the arrangement before I even purchased the property. Additionally, I continued, the Coast Guard has removed an unauthorized surveillance device from my property, which was interfering with federal operations. That device has been logged as evidence in an ongoing security investigation. The room fell silent as residents reviewed the documents. Karen's face flushed crimson, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling in real time. When I returned to my seat, no one called for the vote she had been so eager to hold. The meeting adjourned in uncomfortable murmurs and sideways glances, not at me this time, but at the HOA board. As I walked to my car, I noticed Karen huddled with 3 board members, gesturing frantically. Something in her expression, a mixture of embarrassment and rage, told me that the battle was far from over. She had been publicly challenged, and people like Karen do not accept defeat gracefully. The morning after the HOA meeting, I discovered my mailbox hanging from a single screw, the post splintered as if struck with something heavy. Inside was not mail, but a handful of pebbles and a crude drawing of a sinking boat. I photographed everything before repairing the damage, adding the images to my growing documentation file. 3 days later, my car would not start. The mechanic found sugar in the gas tank, an expensive and deliberate act of vandalism. Again, I documented everything, filed a police report, and added the incident to my case file. I installed security cameras that same afternoon, positioning them to cover my property from multiple angles. The harassment escalated in both subtlety and scale. Each morning, I would find cars parked precisely at the edges of my driveway, making exit difficult but not technically blocking access, a calculated move that skirted the line of illegality. The vehicles always belonged to known associates of Karen, her walking group, her book club members, the families she regularly hosted for backyard barbecues. Then came the fines. Official HOA envelopes arrived daily, each containing notices of alleged violations with corresponding penalties. Improper exterior paint shade, $150 fine. Unapproved garden border stones, $75 fine. Excessive wind chime noise, $50 fine. Improper display of American flag, $200 fine. Unapproved dock maintenance, $300 fine. None of these violations existed in reality. My home's exterior had been the same color since purchase. My garden had no border stones. I owned no wind chimes. My American flag was displayed according to proper protocol. The dock was maintained precisely to Coast Guard specifications. I did not pay a single fine, instead responding to each with a formal letter contesting the citation and requesting evidence of the alleged violation. No evidence ever arrived, but the fines continued to accumulate in their system. The campaign extended online. Negative reviews of my legal consulting business appeared on professional websites, all from local accounts using pseudonyms but clearly coordinated. Posts in the community forum questioned my character, suggesting I had suspicious visitors and engaged in unusual activities at odd hours, thinly veiled attempts to cast suspicion on the legitimate Coast Guard operations. Through it all, I maintained detailed records, never responding emotionally in public. My security cameras captured it all, the late-night drive-bys, the occasional garbage tossed onto my lawn, the people photographing my house from the street. I recognized most of them as Karen's inner circle, her loyal foot soldiers in this petty war. The breaking point came at 11:30 p.m. on a Thursday. My security system alerted me to movement near the dock. The night vision camera showed a figure moving carefully along the path, flashlight in hand. It was not Karen this time, but her assistant from the HOA office, Bethany, a woman in her 30s who handled administrative duties and seemed perpetually nervous in Karen's presence. I watched on the monitor as Bethany approached the dock with what appeared to be a canister in hand. Was she planning to damage the structure? Contaminate the water? I called the police immediately, reporting a trespasser potentially attempting vandalism or environmental damage. When officers arrived, they found Bethany with a can of spray paint, apparently preparing to mark the dock with community access lettering. She broke down immediately, admitting Karen had pressured her into the act, promising protection from any consequences. She said no one would see me at this hour, Bethany explained tearfully to the officers while I watched from a distance. She said you were a danger to the community and someone needed to take action. I needed this job. I did not know what else to do. I did not press charges against Bethany. Instead, I requested and received a copy of the police report, adding it to my now substantial case file. That night, reviewing everything I had collected, photos, videos, falsified violation notices, witness statements, and police reports, I realized I had reached a decision point. This was no longer about a dock or community access or HOA rules. This was targeted harassment, potentially criminal in nature, orchestrated by someone abusing their position of authority. It was time to stop documenting and start acting. I made 2 phone calls that evening, one to my former law partner who specialized in civil cases, and another to Lieutenant Commander Davis at the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard takes security breaches seriously. When Commander Davis learned about the escalating situation, particularly the unauthorized surveillance of their training facility and the attempted vandalism, of a site occasionally used for sensitive operations. The response was swift and unequivocal. Within 48 hours, a formal inquiry was launched into interference with federal operations. The trail camera found on my property was traced through its serial number to a bulk purchase made by the HOA using community funds, an unauthorized expenditure that had never been disclosed to residents or properly documented in financial statements. On a Tuesday morning, residents of Windermere Shores witnessed something unprecedented. A federal marshal in full uniform, accompanied by two officers, entering the HOA office with documentation in hand. From my home office window, I could see neighbors gathering in small clusters, watching and whispering as official vehicles remained parked outside the community center for over 3 hours. I later learned that the federal representatives had collected statements, requested documents, and served subpoenas for HOA records related to actions taken against my property. The marshal also delivered formal cease and desist orders regarding any interference with the Coast Guard lease and operations. The community message board, normally buzzing with activity, fell strangely silent. Karen's usual daily announcements and reminders stopped abruptly. Posts critical of me began disappearing one by one, digital breadcrumbs being hastily swept away. Several residents reported receiving urgent phone calls from Karen, asking if they had spoken to those federal people and what exactly they had said. The following day, an emergency notice appeared on community bulletin boards. Due to administrative review, all pending HOA violation notices are temporarily suspended. Residents who have received fines in the past 90 days may disregard payment requests until further notice. The scheduled dock sharing initiative has been postponed indefinitely. We apologize for any confusion. The notice lacked Karen's usual signature and flourishes. Instead, it was signed simply HOA Board, suggesting a sudden desire for collective responsibility rather than individual authority. Reports filtered back to me through more sympathetic neighbors. Karen had been seen frantically removing files from the HOA office late at night. Board members were distancing themselves, claiming they had been misled or not fully informed about actions taken in their name. The unified front was cracking under federal scrutiny. 3 days after the federal marshal's visit, I received a phone call from Commander Davis. "Thought you would want to know," he said. "We have completed our initial investigation into the surveillance and interference issues. The findings have been forwarded to the U.S. Attorney's Office for review of possible criminal violations. They take a particularly dim view of unauthorized surveillance of federal operations." He paused before continuing. "Also, we have temporarily designated your dock as a secured facility under Coast Guard protection. That gives us additional authority to prevent tampering or unauthorized access. Signs will be posted tomorrow." The next morning, official Coast Guard notices appeared at the entrance to my property and on the dock itself. "Federal facility, unauthorized access prohibited VIOLATORS subject to prosecution." The signs were metal, bolted securely in place, and featured the unmistakable Coast Guard insignia. That same day, a letter arrived from the county government addressed to all Windermere Shores residents. This notice serves to inform residents that effective immediately, the Windermere Shores Homeowners Association is temporarily suspended from issuing fines, enforcing bylaws, or collecting non-essential fees pending investigation of alleged improper governance practices. Basic maintenance services will continue through neutral third-party contractors. An independent auditor has been appointed to review HOA financial records. The letter continued with legal details, but the message was clear. The HOA had been effectively neutered, its powers suspended while authorities investigated its operations. That evening, I observed Corinne through my window as she drove slowly past my house, stopping briefly to stare at the new Coast Guard signs. Her expression was unreadable from a distance, but her white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel spoke volumes. The predator had suddenly become prey, and she was feeling the pressure from all sides. For the first time since moving to Windermere Shores, I slept soundly through the night, without checking security cameras or listening for disturbances. The cavalry had arrived, and Corinne was finally facing forces she could not intimidate or control. My civil case landed like a bombshell in the community. The formal filing, James Harmon v. Corinne Westfield and Windermere Shores HOA, detailed 57 distinct instances of harassment, defamation, property damage, and civil rights violations. The document ran to 73 pages, meticulously cross-referenced with evidence including security footage, witness statements, falsified violation notices, and documented financial improprieties. The lawsuit requested damages of $375,000 plus legal costs, as well as permanent injunctions against the defendants. Copies were served to Corinne personally and to each HOA board member at their homes, a public demonstration that this matter had escalated beyond community politics to serious legal consequences. Simultaneously, the Coast Guard followed through with their own legal actions. Corinne faced federal charges for obstruction of official operations, unauthorized surveillance of government personnel, and attempted tampering with federally designated equipment. These were not minor infractions but serious charges carrying potential fines and even jail time. The community reaction was swift and dramatic. Board members publicly distanced themselves from Corinne, issuing statements claiming they had been misled about the legality of actions taken against my property. 3 members resigned immediately, citing personal reasons that everyone understood to mean self-preservation. The county government, now alerted to potential mismanagement, launched an audit of HOA finances going back 5 years. The preliminary findings revealed disturbing patterns: community funds used for personal expenses, selective enforcement of bylaws against problem residents, and undisclosed personal relationships with contractors receiving HOA business. Local media, initially dismissive of another HOA dispute, now recognized a legitimate story. The Lake County Chronicle ran a front-page article headlined, "Federal Investigation ROCKS Lakeside Community. HOA President Faces Multiple Charges." The reporter I had spoken to, Alicia Chen, wrote a detailed and balanced account that included quotes from former board members and residents describing years of intimidation and rule by fear. Corinne attempted damage control, sending a community-wide email claiming victimhood. Dear neighbors and friends, as many of you know, I have dedicated years of my life to protecting our beautiful community and maintaining the standards that keep our property values high. It saddens me deeply that my efforts have been misconstrued and that I now face attacks from those who do not understand the complexities of HOA management. The allegations against me are exaggerated and taken out of context. I ask for your continued support during this difficult time. The email received minimal response. The power dynamics had shifted too dramatically for her usual tactics to work. When residents calculated the potential financial liability the community faced from my lawsuit, potentially resulting in special assessments against all homeowners, any remaining loyalty evaporated. A petition for emergency removal began circulating online, quickly gathering signatures from over 70% of homeowners. An emergency community meeting was called, not by the remaining board members, but by residents themselves, utilizing a rarely invoked bylaw allowing for special sessions in extraordinary circumstances. I attended that meeting, sitting quietly at the back as neighbors discussed the situation. The tone was somber, focused on damage control and community healing rather than accusations. When the vote for Karen's removal was called, the result was nearly unanimous: 118 in favor, 3 opposed. Karen herself did not attend. The next day, 2 board members and the community manager supervised as Karen's personal items were removed from the HOA office. Her nameplate was taken down, her parking space reassigned, her community access credentials deactivated. A photograph of the scene circulated briefly on the neighborhood app, the final visual evidence of her fall from power. That afternoon, a knock at my door surprised me. A small delegation of residents stood on my porch, looking uncomfortable but determined. Their spokesperson, an elderly gentleman who had lived in the community since its founding, cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Harmon, we owe you an apology. Many of us believed things about you that were not true. We failed to question information that came from someone we thought we could trust. Some of us participated in behavior that was unneighborly at best, harmful at worst. We are here to say we are sorry and to ask if there might be a path forward that does not involve financial ruin for families who were misled." I invited them in for coffee and a conversation about resolution that would address the harm done, while allowing the community to heal and reform. By evening, we had the framework of a settlement that would drop most financial penalties in exchange for governance reforms, accountability measures, and community service requirements for those who had participated most actively in the harassment campaign. As they left, one woman turned back. "The dock really is lovely," she said quietly, "but we understand now why it needs to remain as it is. Thank you for helping keep our lake safe." Spring arrived at Lake Windermere with a sense of renewal that extended beyond just the natural world. 6 months had passed since the confrontation with Karen had reached its climax and resolution. The lakeside community was different now, more transparent, more genuinely collaborative, more respectful of boundaries both literal and figurative. I invested some of the settlement money into completely rebuilding my dock. The new structure was beautiful but functional: composite decking for durability, solar-powered lights for safety, and a more substantial covered area at the end for both my use and Coast Guard operations. Professional-grade security cameras monitored the area, their presence not hidden but not obtrusive either, a quiet reminder that respect for private property was non-negotiable. The new signage was clear but not unwelcoming: "Private Dock Coast Guard Auxiliary Facility, authorized personnel only." Below that, a smaller sign added, "In case of lake emergency, facility may be accessed for safety purposes." It struck the right balance between security and community responsibility. Lieutenant Commander Davis himself attended the small ribbon-cutting ceremony we held when the renovation was complete. He presented me with an official letter of appreciation from the Coast Guard, thanking me for maintaining the facility despite community pressure, and acknowledging the role it had played in several successful rescue operations on the lake. "This dock has already saved lives," he noted in his brief remarks to the small gathering of neighbors who had come to observe. "Last summer alone, our response times for 3 water emergencies were cut by nearly 15 minutes because we had access to this launch point. That can be the difference between rescue and recovery." The newly elected HOA board operated with a completely different philosophy. Meetings were live-streamed for transparency. Financial records were accessible to all residents. Bylaw enforcement followed clear, documented procedures with multiple review options. The community manager, a new hire with professional certification and experience, served as a neutral administrator rather than enforcing the will of a single dominant personality. Most remarkably, relationships began to heal. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact now offered waves and greetings. Invitations to community events appeared in my mailbox. Small gestures of reconciliation materialized: a plate of cookies, an offer to collect mail during a business trip, an invitation to join the community garden committee. Not everyone changed, of course. Some of Karen's most devoted allies moved away, unable to adjust to the new community dynamic. Karen herself relocated to a gated community across the lake, occasionally visible through binoculars as she attempted to establish dominance in her new environment. The legal consequences continued to unfold. Karen received probation and community service for the federal charges, avoiding jail time but acquiring a criminal record that would follow her far longer than her reputation as HOA president. The civil case resulted in a consent decree requiring her to stay a specified distance from my property and prohibiting any communication with me or about me on social media platforms. On warm summer evenings, I often sat at the end of my dock, fishing rod in hand, watching the sunset paint the lake in brilliant orange and pink. Occasionally, Coast Guard personnel would arrive for training or patrol, exchanging friendly greetings before going about their duties. Sometimes neighbors walking the lakeside path would wave, respecting the boundary while acknowledging the shared appreciation of our beautiful surroundings. The dock stood as more than just a wooden structure extending into the water. It had become a symbol of something important: the principle that rights matter, that boundaries deserve respect, that bullies eventually face consequences, and that standing your ground can create positive change far beyond your own property line. As I reeled in my line and prepared to head inside for the evening, I reflected on how this small strip of lakefront property had become the unlikely battlefield for something much larger than a neighborhood dispute. In defending my dock, I had helped restore balance to an entire community, reminding everyone that even in the smallest jurisdictions, the rule of law matters more than the rule of Karens.